Welcome back, everybody, to the David Pakman Show. Luke Beasley here, filling in for David while he is away. We have a wild show ahead of us, so stick around. Let's dive in. Ladies and gentlemen, I have for you the true Twitter files, what should be the actual conversation going on around Twitter, social media platforms, and their role in our political process, specifically the 2020 election. Now, before we dive into these fascinating details, what am I connecting this to? Well, of course, shortly after Elon Musk became the head of Twitter, he started promoting and facilitating the Twitter files. And these were supposed to reveal, through the analysis of behind-the-scenes records at Twitter, the way that Twitter went after Trump, treated him so poorly, treated the conservative movement so poorly and unfairly, and made the difference in the 2020 election. Well, as David has done and I've done on our respective shows, when you actually walk through the details of the Twitter files, that is not shown. It's a pretty dishonest narrative because when you dive into it, you realize these claims are not being backed up in the way that they should, and this does not show what people are saying that it shows, right? And so within that context, I want to dive into now a much more profound and fascinating part of this in my mind, which is through the January 6th Select Committee's investigation, a part of it that was previously unseen up until now reveals that actually the exact opposite was going on. Twitter and other social media platforms were giving preferential treatment to Trump, to far-right extremists, out of fear of backlash. And so the opposite was going on than the narrative that we've heard from right-wingers as of late. This is truly interesting stuff. They decided not to include it in their final report because a number of reasons. My take on it was you kind of can only get the public to focus on a few things. You can't give a million things to focus on with this type of story, and the extensive nature of the report was already going to be quite the batch of information to go through, to talk about, and to open up a whole nother can of worms with its whole nother group of controversies and all of that. They didn't see as worth it, and so it wasn't included in the final report, but they did a lot of investigations, a lot of interviews in regard to this exact issue. The Washington Post has a story on it, what the January 6th probe found out about social media but didn't report. The January 6th committee spent months gathering stunning new details on how social media companies failed to address the online extremism and calls for violence that preceded the Capitol riot. The evidence they collected was written up in a 122-page memo that was circulated among the committee according to a draft viewed by the Washington Post. But in the end, committee leaders declined to delve into those topics in detail in their final report, reluctant to dig into the roots of domestic extremism taking hold in the Republican Party beyond former President Donald Trump, and concerned about the risks of a public battle with powerful tech companies. Congressional investigators found evidence that tech platforms, especially Twitter, failed to heed their own employees' warnings about violent rhetoric on their platforms and bent their rules to avoid penalizing conservatives, particularly then President Trump, out of fear of reprisals. The draft report details how most platforms did not take dramatic steps to rein in extremist content until after the attack on the Capitol, despite clear red flags across the internet. So, bending their own rules to allow Trump to continue violating their rules without being held accountable. Now we'll skip over a part of this just for the sake of time that walks through the specifics of why they decided not to include it in their final report, but we'll pick up here, titled, "Did Twitter Give Trump a Pass?" Some of what investigators uncovered in their interviews with employees of the platforms contradicts Republican claims that the tech companies displayed a liberal bias in their moderation decisions. Contradicts that. An allegation that has gained new attention recently as Musk has promoted a series of leaked internal communications known as the Twitter files. The transcripts indicate the reverse, with former Twitter employees describing how the company gave Trump special treatment. Twitter employees, they testified, could not even view the former president's tweets in one of their key content moderation tools, and they ultimately had to create a Google document to keep track of his tweets as calls grew to suspend his account. Quote, Twitter was terrified of the backlash they would get if they followed their own rules and applied them to Donald Trump, said one former employee. So this highlights a few things. The takeaways, I think, should be number one, this flies in the face of, this contradicts, disproves the narrative we've heard from the right wing that there was this big conspiracy against Trump and conservatives in the build-up to the 2020 election, trying to take him down. If that was the case, they would not have been doing so much, breaking their back to prevent their own employees from moderating Trump's content, from holding him accountable with the rules they've already had laid out. Number two takeaway, this is absolutely a part of what led to January 6th, what caused January 6th. The ability for this far-right extremism to fester, for these lies to spread. And so everyone has different takes on how we address that, and that's an interesting conversation. But we can just recognize reality and say a big role in all of this, in the January 6th attack, in the lies and the speed in which they were able to spread, is the fact that Twitter and other social media platforms absolutely did not apply their own rules, their own standards to these individuals the same way they would to somebody else. And then the third is going forward, let's take this as a lesson and let's figure out what are we going to do going forward. And so social media platforms, us just as a country and the kind of public discourse need to sort out. It's going to be tough because we're also having these conversations with individuals that we're talking about being the problem, right? But figuring out how we move forward and not allow this level of deceit, this level of dishonesty, and then the reaction to that by the platforms being to assist, not necessarily intentionally, but assist in that through their fear of backlash and their lack of enforcing their own rules. We need to figure out how to handle that going forward for sure. Make sure that you are subscribed to the David Pakman Show channel, what you're watching, if you're watching on YouTube right now. And I have a show of my own. When I'm not hosting this show, I'm hosting the Luke Beasley Show. And you can find that at Luke Beasley, Beasley, on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button.
One of our sponsors today is Zippix Nicotine Toothpicks. Zippix brings you a convenient alternative to smoking and vaping and the vape clouds, the ashtrays, the thing in your lip that people can see. I've seen that around. This is an easier and less messy way to curb the cravings, and you can use Zippix just about anywhere. Zippix is available in 6 flavors with 2 or 3 milligram strength. The nicotine and the flavor are long-lasting, and Zippix has helped countless people kick the bad habits, and they are bad habits. Zippix toothpicks are FDA registered. Their customer service is second to none. It is one of the most cost-effective alternatives. Also, check out their B12 and caffeine toothpicks. See for yourself why so many people have switched to Zippix toothpicks. You can only get Zippix online. Go to zippixtoothpicks.com and get 10% off with the code PAKMAN. The link is down below.